Well now, they tell me this little machine's already 10, so I reckon I best begin proper. My name, the one I come into this world with, was Elizabeth Ann Caldwell, born March the 17th, 1842, on a patch of muddy Ohio earth not far from the Scioto Bottoms. Ain't much to mark the place now but fields and wind, though to me it'll always smell of wood smoke and wet corn husks. I took another name when I was 19 years of age, married a man called Thomas Whitaker, and so I come to be Elizabeth Ann Whitaker. Folks mostly called me Lizzie after that, though he preferred Elizabeth, said it sounded steadier, more respectable. Funny what names come to mean once a life's been lived inside 'em. This here recordin' is bein' made in the year 1932. My grandson fetched in the apparatus from town, says it catches a body's voice same as a jar catches lightning bugs. I don't rightly understand the workings, but he set the horn before me and told me to speak clear, so that's what I'm doin'. There's a reason for it. You see, there's something I never told proper, not to my children, not to the preacher, not even in my prayers when the nights were longest and the house went quiet as a grave. My children buried their father believing he was a good man. And I was the one who told them that lie. I've carried that truth folded up inside me longer than I carried any babe, longer than I carried grief for my own ma and pa. More'n 50 years I kept it tucked away, same as a letter you're afraid to open. There were days I near convinced myself it warn't a lie at all, just a kindness, but a thing don't turn honest just 'cause you repeat it often. I watched them stand by that grave, my boys holdin' their hats to their chests, my girls cryin' into their shawls, all of 'em speakin' soft of what a steady, decent father he'd been, and I let 'em, Lord forgive me, I even helped 'em remember him that way, told 'em stories, smoothed the rough parts, stitched up the holes where truth ought to be shone through. I told myself I was doin' it for their sake, told myself children need something solid to stand on when the world takes a parent, told myself the past's a heavy load, and I'd carry it so they wouldn't have to. But a lie, once planted, it don't stay put, it grows roots. It wins itself through birthdays and weddings and Sunday dinners till you can't hardly tell where it starts and you end. There were nights I'd sit up alone by the stove, listenin' to the clock tick and the wind fret against the siding, and I'd think on how many years a soul can keep silent before silence turns into sin. I prayed on it more times than I could count, asked the Lord if mercy might look like forgettin'. Never got an answer I could hear. Now I'm an old woman, my hands tremble when I pour tea, and my eyes ain't much use past dusk. Most of my children got gray in their hair, and their children got young ones of their own. Life keeps rollin' on, same as the river, whether we speak truth or not. But I can feel my time drawin' in, ain't no doctor told me so plain. But a body knows. The mornings come heavier, and the evenings linger longer than they used to, makes a person think on what she'll carry with her when she goes, and what she might ought to set down first. So I'm settin' it down here, all of it, the man I married, the life we had, and the reason I let my children believe what I knew warn't so. Maybe it'll ease my heart, maybe it won't. That ain't for me to say. I only know this much. If a story's been hid half a century, it gathers weight enough to bend a soul clean in two, and I reckon mine's bent near as far as it'll go. I reckon if I'm to meet the Lord soon, I best tell the truth at last. I was raised on Ohio soil, same as my ma before me and her ma afore that. Our farm warn't large, but it was honest ground, the sort that gives a body blisters in spring and bread come winter, if the Lord's willin' and the rain don't forget you. We lived a plain life in Ohio, the kind where the day's work begun before the sun thought to rise and ended when the light slipped clean off the fields. Pa believed in labor the way some men believe in scripture. Said idle hands was the devil's invitation, and I reckon we never gave that particular guest much cause to visit. Ma kept the house runnin' tight and orderly, floor scrubbed, bread set to rise, soap boiled come fall. She spoke gentle, but her ways were firm. A woman's worth, she told me, showed in how steady she kept her home and how well she stood by her kin. Not once did I hear her speak of dreams beyond the fence line. Her world was her family, and she bore it same as a lantern in the dark, quiet, faithful, and never complainin'. Sundays we rode the wagon to meeting, all of us buttoned proper and brushed clean. The preacher spoke long on duty and obedience, and I listened close. I was a serious child, prone to thinkin' more than talkin', and I took them words deep into my bones. I learned early that the world had an order to it, laid out plain as rows in a cornfield, God above all, men set to lead, women set to keep, children to mind both and grow into their places. It warn't said cruel, nor harsh, just certain, like winter followin' harvest. I watched the married women in our congregation, how they leaned toward their husbands when speakin', how their names near disappeared once they wed. They weren't unhappy, far as I could tell. Most seemed settled, even proud of their households. To me, it looked less like losin' yourself and more like steppin' into a shape already made for you. Ma used to say a girl's life truly begins the day she takes a husband. Said a good man gives a woman steadiness, same as a fence gives shape to a field. Without one, she warned, a woman could drift, and driftin' was near as dangerous as starvation. I believed her, why wouldn't I? All I'd ever seen proved it so. Pa provided, Ma tended, the world held together. When storms come, Pa checked the barn and Ma gathered us close. When sickness struck, Pa fetched the doctor and Ma kept vigil through the night. Every part had its place, and every place its purpose. As I grew older, I come to think of marriage less as a choice and more as a door every woman must pass through if she aimed to live decent. Not for romance, mind you, though stories spoke of such things, but for safety, for order, for the simple rightness of a life arranged as God intended. I remember standin' once in the yard at dusk, watchin' Ma hang the last of the wash while Pa chopped kindlin'. The sky was burnin' gold behind them, and I felt a kind of peace settle in me. I thought, plain as breath, that someday I'd stand where she stood, with a husband nearby and children at my heels, and that would be enough. I believed the world worked that way because it was meant to. I believed love grew out of duty, not the other way round. And most of all, I believed a woman's safety weren't something she carved out for herself, but something placed over her by the hand of Providence. I believed a husband was the roof God put over a woman's head. I first laid eyes on him in late autumn, when the wind come sharp off the fields and the trees stood near stripped to bone. It was after meeting in our little church in Ohio, the kind of Sunday where the sermon runs long and folks linger after, not so much for fellowship as to keep from steppin' straight back into the cold. He stood apart from the others, had held low in his hands, speakin' only when spoken to, a tall man, older than most of the bachelors round our way, with a soldier's posture that hadn't yet forgot the drill. Someone whispered he'd served in the war with Mexico years back. and later again in state militia, said he'd seen things no decent man ought to see. His name was Thomas Hale. When he did speak to me, it warn't with any flourish, just a nod, a quiet ma'am, and a question about my father's crops, as if such matters was safer ground than compliments. I remember thinkin' there was somethin' steady in that. No foolish grinnin', no boastin', no whiskey breath, just a calm presence, like a man who'd weathered storms and come out the other side with his bones still straight. Pa approved of him near at once, said a veteran knows discipline, said a man who's faced cannon smoke don't scare easy when the harvest runs poor. Ma liked that he spoke respectful and never overstayed his welcome. And me, well, I liked the way he listened. When I spoke, he watched close, like my words mattered. That alone can win a girl quicker than poetry. He begun calend Sundays, then some weeknights too, always sittin' stiff-backed in the parlor, hands folded, speakin' careful. He told little of himself, said only that he'd buried his folks young and worked farms here and there, said he was lookin' for steadiness now, a home that wouldn't vanish under him. There was a sadness in him, but I took it for depth. A quiet man seemed to me a thoughtful one, and when he smiled, which warn't often, it felt earned, like sunshine breakin' through after a long gray spell. Still, there were moments. Little things I noticed, then pushed aside. The way his eyes went distant when someone mentioned the war, as if he'd stepped clear out of the room without movin', the way his jaw tightened sudden at loud laughter, or how he watched the door whenever strangers passed by the window. Once, my younger brother dropped a pan in the kitchen, and the clang of it rang sharp through the house. Thomas flinched hard enough to knock his chair. He covered it quick, muttered something about nerves, but I saw his hands tremble for a long while after. I told myself it meant he'd suffered. And sufferin', I believed then, made a man gentle. Another time, I asked him why he never spoke of friends from his soldierin' days. He stared at the floor a spell before sayin', most of 'em didn't make it home. He said it flat, without ornament, no tears, no anger, just a fact laid down like a stone. I mistook that for strength. Truth was, there was a heaviness clung to him like damp wool, a stillness that warn't peace so much as something held tight beneath the surface. But I'd been raised to see quiet as virtue, and endurance as goodness. I'd been taught a husband's past was his burden, not his wife's concern. So I set my doubts aside the way a body brushes dust from a skirt, quick and without much thought. When he asked for my hand, it come simple, no kneel-in, no grand speech, just him standin' by the gate one evening sayin', I can offer you a solid house and an honest name, I reckon I'd treat you fair. And I believed that was enough. I believed fairness was the same as kindness. I believed steadiness meant safety. Looking back now, I see plain what I could not then. There was a sorrow in him that warn't softened by time, only buried, and what's buried deep don't vanish, it waits. But I was young, and I saw in him what I'd been raised to value most, order, restraint, a man who didn't waste words nor drink nor chase foolish pleasures. I thought I was choosin' a good man. I thought I was steppin' under a roof God himself had set before me. I mistook silence for strength, and sorrow for goodness. Married life begun gentle enough, at least for the first few weeks. Folks came for the wed din, brought pies and quilts, and we slept that first night in the room with the west wind pressing soft against the window. I held his hand then, feelin' the calluses on his palms, thinkin' I could trace the lines of a man who'd fought battles I'd never seen. I had no notion yet of what battles followed a man home. Thomas, he'd talk some at first about the war, little stories, mostly quiet. I saw men fall, he'd say, voice low, almost swallowed by the shadows of the parlor lamp, fires, and smoke, and hollerin'. Hard to make sense of it. I nodded, tried to follow, but the words made a strange lump in my chest. How could a man endure all that and still walk here, smile, shake hands? I thought sorrow was the price of bravery, and I leaned on it like it was a bridge to understandin'. Nights, though, nights were different. I remember sittin' by the hearth, darning his shirts, hearin' him yell in his sleep, not ordinary cries, but shouts that made the room shiver. I'd clutch my apron, whisperin' his name, feelin' the heat of fear crawl up my spine. Thomas, I'd say, softly, it's all right now. He'd jerk awake, eyes wide, chest hammerin'. He'd mumble nonsense about orders, the captain, the boys. I'd pat his arm, try to soothe him, and he'd quiet down, but it weren't long before the tremor came back. Sometimes he'd sit by the window, hands wrapped tight round a mug of whiskey. He'd sip slow, eyes fixed past the fields as if seein' the war still smokin' out yonder. I asked him once if he was afraid of anything, and he looked at me sideways, mouth set in a line. No fear, only reckonin', he said. I thought he meant reckonin' with the harvest, with life, with the Lord. Later I learned there were reckonings that couldn't be put right with prayers or plowshares. I tried my best to understand. I'd been raised to mind the Lord, the law, and a husband's word. I thought patience and prayer could fix most things, but Thomas, he carried something invisible in his bones, and no sermon nor quilt nor warm supper could ease it. Sometimes I caught him mutterin' curses under his breath, words I never taught him, words that made the hair on my arms rise. I'd ask, Thomas, what's wrong? And he'd grin, an empty, brief thing, and say, nothin', just a bad dream. The war had changed him, though we never named it. His letters home from the front spoke little of the blood, but his eyes, his posture, the sudden flinch at a sound, that told me all I needed to know. And still, we were young, and I wanted to see the man I had chosen, not the man shaped by cannon fire and winter campaigns. I remember the first time he struck out in anger, not at me, at least not openly, but at the furniture, the door, the walls. A plate cracked under his hand when he dropped it. The dog cowered. I asked him what happened, and he said, wind caught it wrong, and I nodded a lot in those days, seein' what I wanted to see, not what was true. Then came the whiskey. At first, a sip with supper, just to settle nerves, he said, but soon the bottle found its place in the corner, and I saw it tip each night with trembling hands. It made the yelling louder, the shadows deeper. I tried prayin', I tried talkin', I tried nothing, because what I didn't yet understand was that the war had come home with him in a way no one else could see. Neighbors whispered sometimes, asking if Thomas was hard to live with. I smiled, nodded, and said, he's a good man, just haunted, that's all. Only I knew the truth of the storms that raged in his mind, the tempests that broke over our hearth after the sun had gone down. I reckon I thought the war would stay over yonder, on the hills and rivers, in the fields of Ohio and beyond. I was wrong. The battles never left him, the names of fallen comrades, the orders that were shouted, the screams and mud and blood. They walked into our parlor every night with him, and I, young and stubborn, thought love and patience could keep them at bay. But it weren't just memories, it were actions, the sudden rage, the glass of whiskey, the slammed doors, small eruptions of a past none but him had seen. And still, the man I married was the man my heart clung to, quiet, disciplined, steady-seeming. Only the facade thinned when the lamp went dim. I did not yet know that silence hides more than peace, that sorrow held close can turn bitter, that what is buried deep may lash out unseen. I only knew that I had a husband, and that I would stand by him, that a vow spoken under the steeple was sacred, and sacred meant unshaken, even by shadowed nights and trembling hands. The war came home with him, though no one else could see it. It was a cold night in January, wind blowin' through the cracks of the old farmhouse. I remember sittin' by the hearth, mendin' his coat, when Thomas's hand shot out faster than a summer storm. It caught my arm, just a slap, but enough to sting, enough to make the firelight flicker off the walls. I yelped, not in anger, but in surprise. The warmth of his touch turned sudden and sharp, and I sat back, clutching the fabric to my chest, trying to understand what had just happened. He dropped his hand, eyes wide, shame flashing across his face. "Oh, Mary. I didn't mean." His voice cracked, like thin ice underfoot. He turned away, fumbling with the mug of water on the table, muttering under his breath about losing control and damn memories. I watched him, chest heaving, the shadow of the war weighing heavy on his broad shoulders. I felt a strange twist in my heart. I wanted to cry, to run, but the words of my mother and grandmother echoed in me. A wife bears, a wife prays, a wife forgives. I told myself, he didn't mean it. The war, it's inside him. I smoothed the crease in my apron, nodded, and whispered, "It's all right, Thomas, it's all right." And for that moment, the anger, the sting, seemed to vanish with the words. Days went by, and I noticed the tension in his hands, the restless tapping when he sat by the window, the way he'd swallow hard when the wind rattled the panes. I reminded myself that patience was a virtue, that the Lord put husbands before wives for reasons beyond my understanding. My mother had always said, "A woman's strength is measured not by her voice, but by the quiet of her heart," and I clung to that, like a child to a quilt on a winter night. The next morning, Thomas apologized, voice low, eyes downcast. "Mary, I'm sorry, I don't know what came over me. I swear, I'll not let it happen again." I nodded, offered a small smile, the kind that didn't betray my hurt. I wanted him to see that I forgave, that my love wasn't broken by a moment of weakness. In my chest, I prayed that it was the war, that it was the drink, that it was something outside of him, something I could reason with. Evenings grew harder. Shadows in the corners of the room seemed taller, darker. I'd hear the clink of a bottle behind the closed door, his muttered words, low growls of frustration, and yet, I justified it all. "It's the hand the Lord dealt him," I'd say to myself. "I must bear it with grace." The sermons in church, the hymns about patience and suffering, they became shields I leaned on, like the back of a chair in the schoolhouse where I learned my letters. I told the neighbors he was a good man, troubled perhaps, but good. Nobody needed to know about the night my arm stung, about the fear that wrapped tight around my chest. That fear, it was sacred, hidden, wrapped in the cloak of my duty. And in those quiet hours, I prayed, not just for him, but for the strength to forgive. "Lord, I whispered into the darkness, "Grant me patience, grant me understanding, let my heart not harden." Thomas never spoke of it again, at least not to me, but I saw it in his eyes, the fleeting guilt, the shame that made his jaw tighten, and I, foolish or faithful, let it be, I found reasons for him, excuses that weighed light compared to the love I bore. I told myself that anger was fleeting, that a good wife bends and bows, like wheat in the field before the storm. I kept on, day after day, mendin', prayin', feeding the fire, tending the garden. Each moment of fear was softened with faith, each sting replaced with a whispered plea to the Lord. I did not yet know that this was only the beginning, that patience alone could not hold back the storms yet to come. And in the quiet, by the hearth where the shadows danced, I whispered to myself, my fingers clutching the fabric tight. I told myself a good wife forgives quicker than she bleeds. The first time I held little Elsie in my arms, the world seemed softer somehow. Her fingers curled around mine, tiny and trusting, and I felt a swell of love I'd never known before. Then came William, and a year later, little Henry. They were my heart walking outside my chest, and I would have done anything to keep their world gentle, even if it meant keeping a piece of truth tucked away in the shadows. Thomas, he was a strange mixture with the children. Some mornings, he'd kneel on the floor, rough hands careful as he taught Elsie to stack blocks, whisperin' little jokes that made her laugh so pure. It felt like sunlight spillin' through the cracks in the old farmhouse. I watched them, smiled through my worry, thinkin' maybe the war hadn't taken every part of him. Maybe there were pockets of goodness buried deep beneath the scars. But other nights, when the wind howled and the house settled creakily, Thomas's temper would flare like the lightning we sometimes saw over the fields. One moment he'd be hummin' a hymn, the next he'd lash out at shadows or the children's mischief. William would flinch, Henry would hide behind my skirts, and Elsie would cling tight, tears streakin' her face. I remember clutchin' them close, whisperin' calm words, tryin' to settle my own heart as much as theirs. "I'm sorry, little ones," I'd say, my voice low, steady. "Father's just tired." And that phrase became a shield, a way to tuck the fear into a box where they couldn't see it. Tired, yes, but never cruel, never mean-spirited, never dark. I gave them that lie like bread, soft and easy to swallow, and they believed it. How could they not? I made it sound so ordinary, so simple, and they wanted their father to be the man I told them he was. And I believed they needed him that way. I started telling myself it was a kindness, not a betrayal. I made excuses for him in their presence, smoothed over the nights of shouting, the sharp words, the slaps that came when no one else was looking. I whispered prayers over the beds, pleadings to the Lord to keep their hearts safe, to keep them from seeing the darker corners of our life. Thomas never spoke ill of the war to them, never let them glimpse the haunted look that sometimes settled over his eyes. I kept the bottles hidden, the tantrums hidden, the silent nights when I prayed he would not rise in anger. Each time the children asked about a yell or a slammed door, I offered that same gentle excuse. "Father's just tired," and I hoped it would be enough. Hoped it would be the seed of a memory where their father was love and patience and laughter, not fear and unpredictability. At first, it felt natural. I reminded myself that a mother's role was to protect, to shield, to create a world for her children where the storms outside never touched them. But slowly, day by day, the weight of the secret pressed heavier on my chest. I carried it quietly, like a brick in my apron pocket, never lettin' it show. By the time little Henry could toddle across the floor, I had built a wall between their eyes and the truth, a wall made of stories, of small excuses, of prayers and whispered reassurances. I became a storyteller in my own home, weaving a father for them out of the fragments that were safe, out of the moments of tenderness, out of the lies that were meant to protect. And as I watched them grow, giggling at simple games, trusting me with their fears and secrets, I felt both pride and a quiet ache. Pride that I had shielded them, ache that the real man, the one they shared a roof with every night, would never be known to them as he truly was. So I kept weaving, stitch by careful stitch, and I whispered over the little heads that lay beside me at night, hearts beating fast with dreams and innocence. I began building them a different father than the one who lived with us. It was a night like any other in late March, the wind rattling the shutters and a cold seeping through the cracks in the old Ohio farmhouse. I'd put the children to bed, one after another, humming soft hymns while Thomas sat by the fire, nursing his drink like it was the only friend he'd ever known. I thought he was tired that night too, maybe more than usual, but I had no idea how dangerous it would become. The first shout came from nowhere, loud, sharp, shattering the quiet. Elsie woke with a start, her tiny hands clutching the blankets, eyes wide in fear. William tried to comfort her, but he was just as small, just as confused. And then Thomas, he threw the chair right across the room, splintering it against the wall. I froze, heart pounding, watching it all unfold, waiting for the moment that would make the air itself seem heavy. I knew him then, not the man I told the children about, not the gentle protector in my stories, but the man who carried the war inside him, the man who had never found peace from the screams in his own mind. His face was red, eyes wild, and for the first time, I felt a chill that reached my bones. I realized he could harm us, not just with words, not just with fear, but with real, unforgiving violence. Thomas stopped, breathing ragged, and looked at me as if searching for an excuse or permission. I swallowed the scream in my throat and stepped closer, keeping myself between him and the children. I felt the heat of anger and fear mix, a storm I could barely hold back. I could have fled, ran into the night, left him behind, but where would the children have gone? Who would have protected them? The world was not kind, and I was all they had. I spoke then, my voice low, steady despite the tremor I felt. It's time, Thomas, quiet now. But the words didn't reach him fully. They only made the rage curl tighter around his fists. I prayed he would tire, that the Lord would grant me just a moment to shield the little ones. Elsie clung to my skirts, whispering that she wasn't scared, though I could see the truth in her wide eyes. William buried his face in my apron, trembling. The night stretched long, each minute drawn out by the fear and the responsibility weighing heavy on my shoulders. I remembered every lesson from my childhood, every sermon about duty and sacrifice, and I told myself that I could endure anything. For them, I had no illusions that the man he once was could return, no hope that the war inside him would ever truly leave, but I had to make sure my children saw only safety, only love, only the father I had built for them in their imaginations. I tended to their needs quietly, whispering comfort, brushing hair from little foreheads, rocking their small bodies as if the rhythm of my arms could erase the terror. I knew the moment of true danger had passed, but the fear didn't leave me. It lingered, a shadow that would follow us for years, and in that darkness, I made my decision. I would never let the truth of that night touch my children. They would never know the man behind the mask I wore for their sake. Even as I sat alone later, listening to the wind sigh through the trees and the empty rooms that had once echoed with shouting, I understood something fundamental. Leaving him might have saved me, might have freed me from the nightly terror, but it would have damned my children's future, and I could not, would not, let that happen. Leaving him might have saved me, but it would have damned my children's future. It was the spring of '92, I recall, when Thomas fell ill proper-like. Fever racked his body and the cough would shake him from head to toe. I tended him as best I could, keepin' the children out of his room mostly, though they'd peek in through the crack in the door, eyes wide, hearts poundin', wonderin' if their father would be gettin' up again. I'd sit beside him on that old chair by the hearth, holdin' his hand, speakin' soft words I hoped might ease the pain. He didn't talk much anymore, only mumblin', sometimes about the war, about comrades long gone, and I'd nod and hush him, keepin' the children's curiosity at bay. I knew then that the man I married was not the one they imagined, but there wasn't a way to explain it without shattering their little worlds. His last night came slow, as if the earth itself was reluctant to take him. I remember the way he looked at me, eyes cloudy with fever, lips barely movin'. "Forgive me," he whispered, and I nodded, though I couldn't speak. There was a final rasp of breath, and then he was gone, quiet as the wind over the Ohio fields. The children, of course, noticed his absence. William asked if he'd gone to heaven, and Elsie wanted to know if he'd be back to read to them. My heart ached, but I made the choice right then, sittin' on the floor with them huddled close. "Your father was a good man," I said, my voice steady though my hands shook. "He loved you more than anything in this world." It was a lie, yes, but I spoke it with the weight of a promise. I told them about his gentle hands, his quiet courage, his protectiveness that I had built in their minds over the years. I told them stories I hoped would comfort them, stories that hid the truth of the nights when fear sat heavy in our rooms, stories that masked the sorrow and the anger and the man's darkness. Evening fell, and neighbors came to pay their respects. I stood among them, keepin' the children close, keepin' the story intact. Each nod, each whispered condolence, made the lie feel heavier, but necessary, for if they knew, if they understood the man behind the mask, it would haunt them longer than the war haunted Thomas. Longer than the echoes of our own hearts could bear. That night, I tucked them in bed, kissed foreheads that had felt both terror and love, and whispered the same lie again, softly, tenderly. I knew then that this lie would last a lifetime, a secret I would carry until my own time was done. I would protect their innocence, their image of their father, even if it cost me the truth. And so, in that moment, the world shifted. The man who had walked through our lives with darkness and fear was gone, and in his place, I planted a story my children would carry as memory, as truth, as shield against the shadows of what had really been. That day, I buried a man, and gave my children a story instead. The years rolled by like the Ohio River in spring, fast, relentless, carryin' all that's dear and leavin' behind the sediment of sorrow. William and Elsie grew tall, their laughter fillin' the rooms of that old farmhouse that had seen both our joys and our fears. They'd ask about their father sometimes, eyes bright, hearts open, and I'd tell 'em tales of his strength, his quiet courage, the steadfast hands that guided us through storms and cold winters. and each time I did, a knot tightened in my chest, for I knew the truth, and the truth was a shadow that never left me. I watched M graduate, marry, raise children of their own. Their voices carried their father's name with love and reverence, and my heart both swelled and ached. The lie I'd sown had grown strong, like a tree with deep roots, and its branches shaded them from the bitter winds I'd endured. And yet, I could not escape the gnawing of conscience, the quiet whisper in the dead hours of night that asked, was it right? Was it mercy, or was it selfishness? I turned often to my prayers in those years, kneeling by the bedside, hands clasped tight. I'd speak to the Lord in words roughened by sorrow, telling him of my choice, of the lie that had shielded my children. I asked for forgiveness in one breath, and in the next, begged that he not grant it, for fear that forgiveness might lift the burden from my shoulders and let me forget the weight I chose to carry. I prayed the Lord would not forgive me, for if he did, I feared I might forgive myself. I'd whisper, voice shaken in the candlelight, tears streaking down a face wrinkled with time and toil. Sometimes, I'd wander the fields alone, feeling the wind press against my back, remembering the nights Thomas raged, the nights I held my children close, whispering lies to keep them safe. I'd see his shadow in the corners, and I'd shiver, for I knew the man I buried was not the father I built in their minds, and yet I did it out of love, fierce and unyielding, even if it meant carrying the burden of guilt for all my days. Family gatherings were bittersweet. I'd smile at the stories William shared about their father, laugh at the tales Elsie recounted, each moment a delicate thread of deception, yet a balm for their hearts, and all the while, the truth sat heavy in my own chest, a stone I could neither lay down nor cast aside. Each laugh, each proud glance from them, reminded me of the sacrifice of honesty, and the cost of mercy disguised as deceit. The Lord, I reckon, understood. I could feel him listening when I whispered in the dark, my breath catching in the chill night air. I did not seek glory, nor absolution from the world, only the hope that in keeping my children safe, I had done right, though the scales of justice weighed heavy on my soul. And so I prayed, night after night, year after year, that my choice, painful as it was, might be pleasing in his eyes, even if the world could not understand. And now, in the twilight of my years, sittin' by the fire with hands worn and eyes dimmed, I reckon on all that's past. I see the faces of my children, grown strong and good, and I know that the lie I carried so long was a shield for them, a balm for their hearts. Even if it scorched mine, the truth might have freed me. But I chose to free them instead. The fire's low tonight, the kindling crackling soft in the hearth, and my hands, they tremble something fierce. Age has a way o' stealing steadiness from a body, but it don't touch the mind, not wholly. I sit here, eyes straying to the shadows that dance across the walls, thinking on all the years, all the choices, all the truths I never spoke. Memory is a strange companion. It keeps some things sharp, others blurred, and me, well, I reckon I've been livin' between the two, like a wisp o' smoke caught twixt the earth and the sky. I've thought long on what mercy means, on what love requires, and on what a mother's heart will carry without complaint. There's a heavy weight in preserving innocence, in building a memory that shields a child from the darkness that walks behind closed doors. But a weight, too, is in knowing that the very same act steals from them a piece of the world as it truly was. Did I spare their hearts, or did I steal their truth? That question's lodged in my chest like a thorn I can't pull free. I reckon in all my prayers, I asked the Lord to guide my hands, my tongue, my mind. I asked Him to let my children know only goodness, to let the shadow of their father's faults fall behind them and not before. I hoped it would be enough, hoping my silence could serve as mercy, and maybe it did, in some measure, though the cost was a lifetime o' reckoning for me. I think o' the stories they tell now, of their father, the laughter in their voices, the pride in their eyes, that image I built. It's tall, it's strong, it stands proud in their hearts, and yet it was never him. Every smile, every fond tale, carries the echo of a lie I nurtured like a tender sapling, and for that, my soul has known both solace and sorrow. The truth, cold and jagged, waits still unspoken, and I reckon it always will. I feel the years press heavy, the night grow longer, and the wind whistle through the cracks in the old farmhouse. I feel the silence of a house once full of noise, the silence of children grown and gone, and in it, I hear the echo of my own choices. I wonder, quietly, if mercy is measured in the comfort of the heart or the weight of truth, and I reckon the Lord alone knows the answer to that. I never told my children the truth about their father, and now I reckon the Lord is the only one left to tell.